Hey everyone, for those who would like to skip straight to the interview questions, the timestamp will be in the upper corner here. But for those who have a bit more time, it is my really great pleasure to introduce you to one of our guests today, Richard Franzese. Richard is not just a very smart guy and a really great scientific thinker whose time I enjoy. He's also one of my few friends in this world. So I am really, really pleased to introduce you to Richard. And the reason that we're having this is going to be the first of a series where essentially Richard and I just record some conversations about our general thoughts and ideas about data science and pursuing a career in data science and being a scientific thinker. So Richard, welcome to the first of what I hope are many episodes of us together. I guess to set the context, a month or so ago, you and I were sitting at a nice socially distanced distance from on my back porch, and we were just having conversations about sort of general ideas that we had about, like career progression in data science and or statistics, and just general ideas that we thought might warrant a little bit more fleshing out. And sort of we have this sort of process where Richard humors me with allowing me to hypothesize various things, and then he tests that hypothesis. So anyway, I think I've spoken enough, but maybe Richard, before we jump into the question and answer with Ujjwal. Ujjwal was a master's degree student who emailed us and said, hey, can you answer some career advice questions for us? So we figured what better way to start this this little mini series on advice. But Richard, now I've talked way too much. Maybe you could just start by introducing yourself and the research that you do.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I'm Richard Franzese. So I work in drug development. I work for a consultancy company. So we help companies of all shapes and sizes through various stages of their clinical drug development program. And what I do is I do modeling and simulation of the drug behavior in the body and effect on the body. So that's what I do from day to day, and I sit in front of a computer doing that. And these days, sometimes on a phone with a video like this as well.
Cool. So Richard is British, and on to the show. So Ujjwal, welcome. You have some questions, but maybe first we have a question for you. Who are you? Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Richard, for being here. So first of all, introducing myself, my name is Ujjwal, and I'm a GW Master's student enrolled in a data science program under CCAS. So basically, I was looking for some counseling and some advice, and I would like to explore more about data science career. So that is why I had asked, and as part of my assignment, there was something that I had to enroll in ASA and WSA associations. So when I went in that association, became a member of it, I came to know about there were some personals regarding data science. So that is why I came in contact with you, Glenn, and then and Glenn introduced Richard. So I hope we will have a best conversation and I will know more about data science.
Cool. Yeah, well, you definitely did come to the right place. Between Richard and I, you might get to something akin to a useful answer. At the very least, we'll try to give you the best that we can offer. Richard, does that sound all right?
Yeah, I do what I can. I'm not making any promises.
All right, sounds good. Well, you'll be in good hands with Richard. So, Ujjwal, why don't we get started? What's your first question?
All right, to start with, I would like to make myself more clear about you and Richard. So why don't I ask, like, what are the technical, why don't I ask saying that, please, would you mind to explain your current job role, Glenn, and you, Richard, both of you?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll give a little bit of a vanilla answer, which is probably what you'll get used to hearing when data scientists in certain technical fields talk about their job, because first of all, they aren't actually at liberty to fully disclose everything that they're up to. But the vanilla answer for what I do professionally is that I do time series modeling and optimization and anomaly detection on healthcare problems. The easiest one that people can look at if they're really interested in seeing what I'm up to is they can actually see I do patient vital sign monitoring. So if you're interested in that, it's basically getting machines to learn about how to quantify and model personalized time series that people generate, for example, from wearables. And so that's one thing that I do. If anyone's interested in that aspect, the patient vital sign monitoring, I will be popping those videos in YouTube if they want. I'll pop the links in the description so that people can follow those. The same for Richard. He has several items, webinars that are available if you would like to familiarize yourself with him. The other bit of the answer of what I do is actually around the support of clinical trials. So whereas in one bit, what I'm doing is I'm using machine learning data science to look out after patients, I can actually also look out after the scientific integrity of clinical trials as well, using many of these same techniques. As I said before, one of the reasons I really wanted to invite Richard on was because he actually does something quite a bit different. He actually doesn't even call himself a data scientist, but much of the work that he does, I think, would very strongly fall around the data-intensive sciences. So maybe, Richard, you could fill in the gaps for what you do.
Yeah, sure. I think ultimately I still work with data, but the best way to describe my role is a pharmacometrician. So that's really just understanding drugs, how they behave in the body and what effect they have on the body. And what I personally do in my current role is the modeling and the simulation of the drug pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So modeling of it, simulating from the models, and ultimately, working the consultancy as I do, the purpose is to help drive decisions about doses to choose, sources of variability of drugs, and help partners make those decisions.
Cool. And I guess one useful consideration that might be missed out by a little bit by earlier career professionals is that I think one of the main differences between what Richard does and what I do is that Richard's work is much more focused on a mechanistic understanding of the sort of scientific phenomena that are at play. So whereas Richard is to some extent, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are more actively modeling the direct mechanics and dynamics, biological dynamics. The way that I approach my own data analysis is a bit more, I wouldn't say tangential to that, but I'm more looking at the correlations and things like that, as opposed to trying to directly create a model for the mechanism that creates my data.
Yeah, you make a good point. I think the field I'm in kind of bridges between the two. So some models are truly mechanistic in nature, but you do, as you get later in drug development, it might be more empirical modeling. So it depends on the problem you're trying to answer, but my field is ultimately interdisciplinary and it covers both. But fundamentally, you're right, Glenn, it's important to have some, where possible, scientific hypotheses you're trying to test. So there are subtle differences, certainly.
Cool. So, Ujjwal, I hope that answers your first question. What is your next question?
So for the second question, I would like to ask, what kind of key technical skill sets are you guys involved in, or what you guys should have, and what are the non-technical scientific and interpersonal skill sets that you guys should have for the jobs?
So day to day, I do a lot of work with R. Data visualization, exploration, some modeling as well, depending on the problem. But there's some industry software that I also use that is licensed for population modeling. So, lots of technical programming in each day, really. Other non-technical skills. So, a lot of my role is client-facing, so talking to people for whom I'm working. So there's a lot of communication that goes on about explaining difficult or complicated problems to an audience that don't necessarily understand the intricacies, or that's not really the purpose of the communication. So, everything from sitting at a computer, building models, running simulations, to a whole day of meetings explaining those results to different audiences.
Yeah, and I think that one of the key things that Richard forgot to mention there is he's also just a joy to work with. So that's one of his key non-technical skills. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to be as fun to be around as Richard. So I guess for me, I'll just hop in and talk about some of the bits that I do. I will double down on what Richard said as far as a lot of like data exploration. I think that there's generally this belief that a lot of practicing data scientists are building models every day, that they are doing a lot of the fanciest, most cutting edge work. A lot of it, depending on where you are in a project lifecycle, could be that you are spending most of your time exploring data or trying to curate your data in a way that it's actually amenable to analysis. So I think that one of the key aspects that's everyone talks about the data exploration phase and the data cleaning phase, but the fact is the willpower and the perseverance that it takes to get through those before you can get to the stuff that you really find most fun, which for most people, I believe, is a lot of the statistical modeling. There is a very strong element to that. For me, whereas Richard works in R, I work predominantly in Python. And I think that's mainly just a function of the different domains that we're working in, where if I have to pass my work off to a software engineer or someone else like that, having it in Python does make it more tractable for someone to immediately take and implement into another system. So I think that that might be a good broad division where if you're working in more of a purely research and sort of where the output is knowledge, then R is very popular, especially if you're in a more statistical setting, where if the output actually needs to be reintegrated into some other technical components, Python tends to be very popular. So I think that at least hits the programming issue. I guess other technical bits are obviously the basics of optimization, time series modeling, anomaly detection. So those modeling techniques as well.
I guess I would add that, some of the technical things that are important for me particularly are, at some level understanding the biology of the problems, depending on what stage of development you're working in, that becomes either of crucial importance because you're trying to work it out, or there needs to be some awareness of the underlying biology, to interpret what you're doing. So from a technical perspective, the underlying science becomes often quite important for my role.
Yeah, should we maybe let's consider that, I guess, part two of the question, sort of what domain knowledge do you need? Because especially in things like healthcare, you can spend a lot of time floundering if you don't know the domain knowledge. And frequently the domain knowledge is actually a barrier to entry if you're wanting to have a job in this area, where if you don't have a good appreciation or intuition about the domain in which you are applying your data science or your analysis, there's not as much that you can do in a timely manner. And so that is a barrier to entry, understanding, for example, clinical science, experimental design. In Richard's case, you actually have to understand aspects of human physiology and human biology, the chemical dynamics that happen. Richard, am I along the right track?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is that. And I think that one of the valuable things of being good at modeling in and of itself, particularly in my field, is if you are very astute with model development and simulation, say, it is possible to straddle many different therapeutic areas, but ultimately there's a lot of specificity in domain knowledge as you go further in your career. So, somebody who's starting early would be different to somebody who, has spent 10 years in cancer drug development, because, it's a very different experience and expectations there as well. I think that answered the question.
Yeah. I think we knocked it out. Ujjwal?
Yes.
Next one.
So moving on to next question, I would like to ask, what was your career path into your current job? So would you go ahead first, Richard, and then Glenn will continue you?
Yeah, sure. So my undergraduate degree was in physics. And whilst I was doing some physics, I did some biochemistry, and I did a fair amount of biological physics. And then, and this is probably a fortunate step, I went into a doctoral program where one of the focuses was interdisciplinary work, which is ultimately what I do now, really. So I worked in engineering science, working in biomechanics for my doctorate, and I looked at variability. So I used a particular technique of modeling, mixed effects modeling, which is transferable to what I do now. But between that study and my job, I was a teacher for 2 years. I taught high school mathematics, which again was a fortunate step, because a lot of the skills as a teacher that I've picked up have been transferable to client settings and, you know, all the kind of work I do in an interdisciplinary framework. And then along the way, other things like, you know, I did some coaching, which is very, very important when it comes to helping communication between people. So I wouldn't have said I planned to do what I'm doing in any way. I'm not sure how easy it is to plan. So the fortunate step for me was when I was writing up my thesis, I had some discussions with people simply by chance where they said, like, listen, you've got some background in R, you've used these modeling techniques, and you've got some biological experience. Consider looking into this field, the field of pharmacometrics. And I had enough lead time, I guess, to actually do that, and simply applied for jobs and found myself working where I am now. So, and that was 4 years ago now.
Yeah, Richard, I remember some of the conversations that we had, and where basically it was that point in your doctoral work where you basically said, what I realized was that the bit of my doctoral work that I enjoyed the most was the statistics. And that was the most interesting thing in having those conversations where you're telling people, you know, like here's how we should actually be modeling this data that we've been talking about for so long, and noticing that there's a discrepancy between how the field was generally handling this data and how you thought was a more principled way to do it.
Yeah, that's correct. So you're exactly right. A lot of what I personally found interesting in my research has turned into my job, really. And not that I had that idea when I was doing my research, but certainly, you know, I was fortunate enough to find a field where the techniques I found enjoyable and impactful in my own work are actually really quite standard for, you know, pharmacometrics, actually. So.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna, if you want to put a pin in that thought for a second.
Sure.
So very quickly, what I did was I did math and econ undergrad, operations research for a master's degree. Then essentially I wound up in the same doctoral department as Richard. Not the same lab, but still the same department of biomedical engineering. And in my doctoral work, I was working on time series modeling, optimization, and anomaly detection. And so, like Richard, it happened that the techniques that I was working on were widely applicable. So even though by fortunate chance, my doctoral work is actually highly related to what I'm currently working on, the new areas where I work on as well, when I've started adding applied domains, they also benefit from the fact that I am knowledgeable about these broader subjects that are universally useful. So in Richard's, it's hierarchical modeling, I think,
Yep.
Yeah, that's what you'd consider it. Yeah. So, Richard basically, he ended up developing a large amount of intuition and technical understanding of a highly applicable technical field. And the same for me. So I think that's a commonality that's worth pointing out, that some of these more generalized technical skills, you can start applying them across different areas, and that does broaden your horizon.
I would agree quite wholeheartedly, Glenn.
Yeah. So sweet. So I guess the next question.
All right. So as both of you mentioned, doctorates in your educational background. So would you both consider a doctorate to be an educational requirement to become a data scientist? What will be the minimum technical requirements to do your job? Well, Richard, you can go first, and Glenn can continue.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, you know, that the question of data science versus, I mean, it's hard for me to really say, because again, I don't think I'm firmly in that sphere like Glenn is. But for my role, really, the standard is people have doctorates in some field. The fields can be very diverse, certainly. You can have physics and engineering background like myself, or, you know, a PharmD background, or maths, purely maths, biochemistry, chemical engineering. You know, really, it's, I think, a very firm understanding of the scientific method is important, and enough time to really develop skills. I think probably in isolation that are important, and I think, yes, a doctorate seems to be the sensible pathway into that. for my particular role. But then that being said, it's not strictly necessary. I think the key would be being very good at something relevant is probably the most important piece.
Okay.
Yeah, and for me, I'll backtrack to the original answer, which is, what is necessary to do your job? And I would just very quickly sort of address the idea that, the ability to do your job isn't a binary. Now, clearly there are some people who can't do a job, but at the same time, it is much more on a continuum of capability where, how well you're able to do a job or how quickly you can complete a job task. If someone is unskilled in an area, it might take them much longer to, for example, develop a functioning model. Or if they're unknowledgeable at the subject, they might lose time because effectively they're working in unproductive ways. But just very quickly, like there's very rarely a effective binary on can do the job versus can't do the job. I'd say the first thing for the people who can versus can't do a job, if you can't code, you probably can't do most data science jobs. Secondly, if you know very little about data analysis, you probably can't do a data science job. At the same time, like, do you need a doctorate? They're semi-common in my field, but not always. Again, Richard is much more heavily in that, like I would say more industrial research, which I say would consider to be a bit more academic in its general mindset. And whereas where I work, doctorates are quite rare. I don't think people need a doctorate to do what I do. I think that they need the skills that Richard talked about. Other than that, for example, the time to sit down and work independently so that you have time to deeply think about an issue. Good scientific critical reasoning skills are basically better than any doctorate that you could have. If you have those scientific reasoning skills, you have all the skills that a doctorate was meant to produce in a person. So I think that, and people like to think that just because they're in a quantitative field or a scientific field, that makes them a good scientist or that makes them a good critical thinker. And the fact is it doesn't. Critical thinking is a developed skill set. You do need to work at your critical thinking. You need to be challenging yourself and you become better at it over time. I'm a better critical thinker than I was 2 years ago. Richard is a better critical thinker than he was during his doctorate. And, there's that growth period. And it's not to say that neither of us were bad at it beforehand. It's one of the reasons why I think we became so attached as friends, because we had that shared critical thinking interest. But at the same time, it is a developed skill, and people shouldn't sort of say, oh, well, I'm in a technical field, therefore I have the skill. The domain knowledge that Richard mentioned, obviously that is something that is also developed over continuum.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think there's important points I probably didn't make very articulately. One is that, as Glenn said, I think there's skills that you need, right? And one crucial skill is understanding data and interpreting data. Fundamentally, that's probably one of the biggest skills that is important. And then, of course, is actually functionally getting on with it with programming. And I've seen people who are new to programming but have enough critical thinking skill and flexibility to sail off into the sunset and do very, very well. I think the reality of my specific field is having a doctorate or having a master's with a lot of experience elsewhere that's relevant are two ways into the field, but ultimately you have someone who's got a doctorate does not mean they're going to be great at the role at all. I think that it's very variable, and I think Glenn hits it on the head really. There are skills you need more than there are letters after your name.
The letters don't hurt just to get your foot in the door, but whether or not you're actually going to contribute to your field, it does require a skill set that doctorates are meant to produce, but might not necessarily produce. You can get, I'll just a very quick thing. I would say, like, if you want like a very quick skill set, if you go to Udemy, there's is it Jose Portilla? He does those big data science Python courses. He's like a millionaire Python and data science teacher. Those are very impressive courses. And I think that those can at least help you knock out that basic skill of coding, which then can let you start working productively on things. And I think that one bit is when you're able to interface with the data via coding, it does start generating that scientific intuition, that scientific thinking. We can't be scientific thinkers in a box. And so those two skill sets will help you develop because they'll put you on the path. Obviously there are some people who are born geniuses, but a lot of us are just making the best of our experience and becoming better at that. And so using every moment to grow, or wasting every moment and they don't become any better at time. Like, I think that's something worth saying too. Like, a lot of people, you could give them 10 years to grow in a career, and they just aren't going to do it because they're sort of, spinning their wheels. Cool. Yeah. I think we pretty well beat that question.
We both nailed it. I'm completely.
Cool. All right. So should we go to the next question?
Yeah, so being more specific now, so would you both think that so there are specific non-technical traits that employers look for? So Glenn, you go first, and then Richard.
Yeah, so I'll just generally address the issue of what traits employers look for, because data science is a hot field, and I think it's worth saying that not all employers actually know what they're looking for. Typically, someone trying to employ a data scientist might not actually have any experience as a data scientist. They might be, for example, an engineering manager, or they might be a product manager or someone like that. And so they might not, given that they have no personal experience working in these fields, they might not actually know precisely what they need. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind, that employers may or may not even know what they're looking for. At the same time, there are skills that you should look for in yourself. And I think that some of those skills include the desire to add value. There's no getting around the fact that you do need to be looking to proactively add value. I know data science is a hot topic, but simply because you have the title data scientist does not mean that you're actually inherently valuable for your company. You do need to work more and deliver that, and that is hard work. So going at it with the mindset of adding value, I think, is important.
I mean, to pick up on what you said, Glenn, I think that's crucial, particularly in my field. So I work in consulting. So, the whole purpose is to help somebody who is a sponsor, who owns something, is driving something, to help them essentially speed up their process or fill in gaps that they don't have with their expertise, which is adding value, right? And I think the one thing to say that is probably important is that there's sometimes a solution to a problem in my field, which is you don't need a model. You don't want a model for this because it's not going to change anything that isn't incredibly obvious, for example. So, I think that you have to be quite open-minded with what it is you really do in my field. And modeling and simulation is the way I help people make decisions, but really what is important is helping people make decisions, and that comes back to Glenn's point, which is adding some value.
Yeah, as another sort of maybe another way to view this is sort of the humility aspect, where what we tend to like is the fact that we are doing sophisticated data modeling or sophisticated inference in some way. That's the bit that really makes us feel like we're cool and on the edge of things. But at the same time, the sort of data reality, the clinical reality, scientific reality might not actually require that. And so as when Richard said, knowing when you don't need a model, when the model isn't going to actually tell you anything new, having the humility to take yourself out of that and just say, yeah, you can rule of thumb that one and move along with your day. Is important. And so I think that is important to basically say, I'm going to put the actual needs of the customer. They don't need my sophisticated model, even though that will elevate me. What they need is just to continue following their intuition. I think that's a very powerful thing. And it does get back to the idea again that it's not about you getting to call yourself a data scientist. It's about delivering value essentially to the people writing your paycheck or designing these trials. That's deliver value to other people is what you should be focusing on. And that's not straightforward. That's not a straightforward, easy to solve problem. That's a very difficult problem.
So I'll add to that in a second. So one of the other key non-technical traits in my role is really about communication, and because my role is much of a partner on people making decisions, there's some idea of how do I persuade somebody about something that is or is not important if they're not able to look into the details. So there's lots and lots and lots that's important about communication, patience, and also, the nature of my field is that things go in peaks and troughs in terms of speed of work. And I think there's a lot that's important around teamwork. That is, yes, I can jump in and I will help, or I need some help. Can I have someone to help me and ask for that? I think these are things that until you're in the furnace, as it were, it's hard to sort of appreciate that happens to everybody. So I think there's a huge component non-technically of, can you really contribute to a team and work with a team on problems when you have to quickly divert your attention or make a step here or a step sideways?
Yeah, and just to fill in some context, Richard, if this is okay, I've always understood that your role is twofold. One, you are working with people internal to your company, but you're also outward facing, where essentially you are, that guy is is to some of your customers, the face of your company. And so that interaction is, you are a representative of your company. In contrast, what I do, I'm very well packaged inside, like very well insulated within my company. I talk to, I talk to my boss, I talk to a data manager, I talk to a software engineer, and I'm very well packaged. I never see the outside bit. And so where I think that might help add a little bit more context to what Richard's talking about, where to some extent Richard's human interactions are a bit more high stakes because he's essentially dealing with external people. Whereas, for example, in my own stuff, I essentially work with the people who see me every day. So I get to have that extra sort of safety layer where the people who deal with me are internal.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of my role, more and more so, that is interacting directly with clients on what they need, what we have to deliver to them, interpretation wise or suggestion wise. So yeah, there's an element of you serve two roles, and ultimately a lot of people in my field sit on an edge where they try and gather information from people who sit and model all day, and that's what their expertise is, and they do very well in that, and then that's condensed, that's communicated, and vice versa. So there's an element there that's important as well, that isn't technical, really.
Cool. Next question.
All right. So for the next question, I would like to ask that. So, the number of data science roles seem to be continually growing. So are there certain jobs or skill sets that are likely to have more growth than others? So to answer this question, Glenn, you go first, and then Richard will continue you.
Yeah, cool. How about this? I will do something that Richard and I do when we're having our own conversations, which is I give a hypothesis, and Richard will test that hypothesis. So my hypothesis is something like this. Here's one place where you might look to see, will data science be growing in this area? Look at domains where where they are digitizing. Where they're digitizing means that they are developing, for example, software in these areas. I strongly suspect that many data science roles tend to follow in places where software is developed. This isn't a universal rule, but if software is being developed in a place, I suspect that data science jobs are going to follow. And my approximate reasoning for this is twofold. One, if software is being developed in a field, it means that this field is probably profitable or lucrative. There's an economic sustainability to it. And if it is lucrative, people are going to be staying around in that area. Secondly, where there's software, there's automated data generation. And where there's automated data generation, it means there's sufficient amount of data for two things to happen. One, there's enough data that it'll keep a person busy and employed working on it as a full-time job. So, it can actually, you can have a data scientist working on this full-time. If you can't, there's not enough data to support a full-time data scientist, probably won't have a job there. If you do have it, you probably will. And secondly, and I think this is very important, that by having enough data, it means that the benefit of the data scientist is very scalable. So the idea here is that if you have a data scientist working on large data sets, that if there's a benefit to come from analyzing that data, then the benefit of the data scientist is scaled up, there's a multiplicative effect there, which means that you effectively are returning a very good value for your data analysis. So that's my hypothesis on one place where you might be seeing a lot more data scientists. Wherever they're developing software today, there's probably data scientists to follow for the phenomena and for the mechanistic reasons that I just described. So that is my hypothesis.
Interesting. I guess the biggest difference when you were saying that, Glenn, is that my field doesn't have much data. That's the challenge. The challenge is actually that, getting clinical trial data is both expensive and difficult, and you don't want to just get it. You don't want to keep taking blood samples from people just because you want to. That's not ethical. So there's a very different problem in my field with scarcity of data. So, I think that when there are methods that help that become more efficient, that's probably areas where there's growth.
Yeah, I think you've actually brought up a very important thing where it seemed that probably say 10, 15 years ago, for example, a large portion, especially if you'd say 20 and 30 years ago, a lot of people coming out of statistics departments 20 or 30 years ago, they were probably going to go into the pharmaceutical industry, for example. So that and this might be a gross generalization, but the fact is it was essentially taking statisticians, if you want to call them data scientists, whatever, call them what you will. They're essentially going to work on small data problems. And now there are these new industries that have much more data, which one means that there's more competition for the same skill set. I think that there's sort of this a bit of a divergence where we have people with this very similar quantitative skill sets, but one of these industries is still very much focused on small data type problems. And one of them is essentially dealing with the digital era type data problems. And of course, pharmaceutical companies are bringing in digital era data problems now, but there are still those fundamental small data problems that require very good understanding of experimental design, those types of confounding issues. So I think that there is a bit of a split there. And my hypothesis is meant to describe that sort of already digitized industry.
Yeah, and I think that in the where I work, really, there's a lot of regulation in what is acceptable and unacceptable with justifying, in my case, doses, right? And I think there's a whole different area of medical devices. So I guess as where you've worked, Glenn, where there is a lot of data because of the nature of what you can collect, and I think they're very different in terms of what you can do, and they lead themselves to slightly different problems. I do think in my field where there's not much data, there's still space for people who know how to understand and interpret data. One of the areas I think that is probably quite data rich potentially is drug discovery. When you're very, very early on in kind of chemical entity spaces, years potentially before you actually get to, in vivo, in human trials, where there's huge amounts of data and you really are trying to make decisions about, what things to bring forward. And, that becomes a problem which is very data heavy relatively anyway, where data scientists, I think, can really add value with simplifying or finding signals in the data which aren't very easy at that point to interpret in the way they are in a phase 1 or phase 2 trial, or at least should be.
So from your point of view, what do the employers expect for today's data science jobs?
Yeah. So I guess as I hit on a bit earlier, sometimes employers know what they're looking for, other times they don't. A lot of them do know very specifically when they're in a specific domain, there's a specific domain knowledge that they're looking for. Alternatively, there's a specific skill set that they're looking for. For example, if someone's working in image analysis, they're probably going to be much more keen to have someone who is used to, for example, deep learning methods than, say, someone who's doing, just plain old logistic regression. There are certain technical there's certain technical methods that are very amenable to certain domains. At the same time, there's also a lot of people who are just trying to hire data scientists right now, and I think that's very important to keep in mind that the person who's written a job description, for example, might not actually know what a data scientist does. And so a quick rule of thumb that I've always thought is worthwhile is, again, here's another hypothesis, that the longer the list of requirements in a job specification, probably the less they know about what the job actually requires, because like anyone can just put anything in there. It's like we want them to do Python, R, and MATLAB, and we also need them to know Cupertino, and they need to I don't know, they got to spark the Hadoop
AWS
things. Yeah, and it's just like you can squish these words together, but it doesn't actually make a cohesive view of an actual human being. And so typically people who do know what they're wanting, just like you asked us, what are the minimum requirements for a job? And my answer is, well, you probably could just knock out this Udemy course and just start learning things. And I think that people who do have a good grasp of what you need, they have a good grasp of what the minimum requirements are. So that's, I don't know, that's my 10-cent thing. Richard, did you have any thoughts?
Well, it's a bit of a challenge for me to answer this question because, data science, as we already know, is not precisely what I do. But, to echo, I think, some of what you said, Glenn, around what do employers expect? If they expect lots of small pieces, it's probably a red flag. I think, speaking from my field, the crucial thing for me is interpreting data, being able to explore data, and to communicate that well. I think that is the key, really, also for employers who are trying to employ people who really do have a role that's technical. It's those 3 steps to be able to do that technical role, and crucially to be able to communicate it, I think.
Yeah, actually, I think that's an interesting thing if we hit on the communication issue a bit, because I think one of the things that really can pull in a potential employer is, for example, if you demonstrate critical thinking skills. One, this will be helpful to you because a person who has critical thinking skills, which is someone who you might want to have as your boss, for example, is typically very apt and very keen to identify that in other people, because it's sort of like a beacon that's like, yes, I can actually communicate and rationalize and work with this person. So I think that if you are a data scientist and you, for example, can deliver some type of extra insight or some critical thinking or some non-intuition that you have actually worked through, I think that's a very good sign for the people who know to look for that. At the same time, again, there's a lot of people. I'll actually just give you a very quick anecdote where I haven't applied for a job in a long time, but it was actually, this is Richard, right when I had come back from Wuhan back in, I guess now almost 2 years ago, where basically I just come back from giving a keynote speech at the Chinese Association of Integrated Medicine. So basically Oxford University was invited to send someone an AI. They chose me to go and talk. So basically flew me halfway across the world to talk. I come back within about a month or so, I was having a job interview. And I was going through this with this person who was interviewing me for a job. And what they wanted to do is quiz me on SQL. And so it's one of those things where it's like, man, it's like I have multiple patents from a university. I have about a dozen, maybe 14 publications. I've worked in clinical trials. It's like, are you really wanting to quiz me on SQL, which is basically something that, frankly, a high school student could learn in a weekend. And so these are things that, I think it's a very good example where people there's an oddity here where they sometimes look for things that they can test you on, but that's not necessarily any way indicative of whether or not someone has critical thinking skills. So I, in that case, use my critical thinking skills, say, actually, I'm not interested. Good luck. And, it is useful to actually have that perception that not every job is worth taking. I know that sounds hard to people who are in the process of looking for jobs and think, oh, will anybody take me? I know that sounds kind of smug to be saying, but keep in mind, you will pay for it with your time trying to essentially appease employers who don't know what they're looking for. It's just, you're not going to pay for it right then by getting, for example, rejected or moving on from an opportunity. You're going to pay for it by having to sit behind a desk for 40 hours a week, dealing with that type of system that has that type of selection process. So you're entering the algorithm one way or the other, and so I guess be aware on that.
So just from my personal point of view, okay, so you both say that you should be able to demonstrate the critical thinking capacity or ability to employers or to someone who want you to convince her. So exactly, I mean, how like for me, how shall I be like? I have never been in any data science job. I have never been to any professional industry out there. So how would you suggest me for like, this is not a part of question, just for my curiosity. So how would you suggest me to demonstrate my or increase my critical thinking skills?
It's a good question. I would say just a very quick thing. Keep in mind that it is a development and that experience helps with development. And so basically, I would say you get involved, you really bury yourself into a problem. Like Richard said, one of the main benefits of a doctorate is that essentially you sit down and you're by yourself and you think about a problem and you work through it, and you do it yourself. And so I think if you feel like you don't have the skills that you need right now, it doesn't mean that you're lost. It doesn't mean that you're doomed or defective in some way. What it means is that you need to start getting yourself into a situation where you just start solving problems. It's like the kids who are always the annoying kids, the ones who are good at their math problems back in high school. And like the ones who sit down and actually do it themselves do truly understand how to solve these types of problems. They're better at it. Whereas if you just keep flipping to the back of the book and looking at the answer, and the problem is, I think as you go higher up, there's way more opportunities where you can always just flip to the back of the book until it's too late. And research is the one place where there's no back of the book to flip to. Once you're in research, you're just there. And I think, Richard, does that sound about right?
No, it does. I think there's a couple of things I would add to that. It sounds a bit morbid, but I think you have to have a few existential crises about what you're doing. Insofar as, it's very clear when somebody can define the problem for themselves of what do they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do think a difficult doctorate is a quick way to, well, it's not that quick, actually, doesn't feel like it. It's a way to get to that issue. So, I really think that getting to the point where you can define or understand what it is you want to do is a really big step. And that really becomes quite clear to somebody who's asking you what you want to do.
Yeah. If you give a crap about the area in which you're working, Ujjwal, that is a very good way to start becoming a better critical thinker on it. Like if you at least care about the area in which you're applying your work, it doesn't matter if it's in finance or healthcare or Pokemon card counting or video game AI. Like if you care about the end result, that will be enough to spur you to start developing that intuition. Like Richard and I can go through stories about like research projects that we've had, different projects that we've been involved in that have gone well, that haven't gone well, places where we had like real flares of pseudo genius, if you will, and like solve something well. We've had times where we've learned something. And the main commonality in that isn't the us bit. It isn't because it was Glenn and Richard. It's because we're in it, working through it, and we cared. And so I think that's one of the things where like you have to have a bit of faith in yourself. If you put yourself in a situation that you care about, you will start developing those skills. And the other bit is you just work hard. A lot of these insights happen because you basically are not just putting in a 9 to 5. It's because you're thinking about it after school. You're thinking about it while you're out exercising. If you are a bit subsumed by that problem that you're trying to solve, that will lead you out of it. And I think that, so don't feel afraid ever to just be like, you know what, I'm going to be the guy who's just working on this problem, don't have much of a life, but I'm going to solve this. And once you've gotten the insight to do that once, it gets easier and easier to do. And so I think that's something.
Well, I think if there's one thing I would add to this is that, one of the things I picked up teaching is that students don't ever see their teacher working through, in my case, a mathematics problem. So it's very hard to see, I guess, behind the wizard's curtain, right? To actually see what it's like when you are trying to solve a problem where, potentially, maybe someone would expect you to know what the problem is, The people who are very good at critical thinking, they don't need to, you trust that they don't need to actually know the answer to a problem if you give it to them. I think what you need to know is that they will think about it properly and have some of the skills to do that, rather than some nice little project where they've demonstrated it once, right? And I think that's that comes from really doing it over and over and over again yourself. And then after a while, people just pick it up and realize that, yeah, you know what you're doing. Because they can ask you a question, you might not know the answer, but you can try and get to some answer.
Yeah. Actually, I know that Richard and I keep layering on our ideas, but I think here's actually something that's interesting that would also be worth thinking about. The ability to think critically means that you might not necessarily, it removes the need to have the answer. For example, what is the perfect statistical method or data science model to solve a problem? The ability to critically think means that effectively you have multiple tools as opposed to hoping that you just happen to know the right one that is the answer. And I think I'll go out on a limb, given that I know so many statisticians listen to this podcast, and say I think Andrew Gelman is a very good example of this, where if you go onto his blog, yes, he is a very smart guy. He's also a very, very good critical thinker. And a lot of what makes reading him, I think, so interesting to me is that a lot of the time, it isn't like he's saying, oh, here was the one precise method that would have worked. The reason that his discussion is so interesting is because he critically evaluates what's ahead of him and simply describes the problem very well. And so that type of analysis means that he doesn't, now I'm in dangerous territory saying what Andrew Gelman would or wouldn't need to do. That's super dangerous territory. I'm feeling more nervous by the minute. But, again, the idea is it's his critical thinking that is so important. And it doesn't matter if he knew the right answer from the get-go. It's the fact that pretty much everyone trusts him that he's going to arrive at the right answer because he's just so good at thinking his way through problems.
The one last thing I'd say on this that you sparked in my head was that I think one of the key things is the ability to define a problem. Because if you can't define the problem, you can throw anything at it, but there'd all be a waste of time. So I think the ability to define what the problem is crucial. Because that's probably the first step. You want to talk about something. Okay, here's the problem, and therefore here's one of many solutions. Is probably the way most discussions go, and then there's a series of questions afterwards. But I think what you're hitting on just in that last bit, Glenn, was the ability to define a problem.
Yeah, the clarity of thought. And on which I will say that let's maybe we should just truck along to the last few questions.
So let me ask very quick, and I expect you very short questions from coming questions, okay? So how do you look or apply for data science related jobs?
I don't. Yeah. Just a very quick thing to be realistic there. I hope this doesn't sound smug, but the fact is if you have a doctorate in a very quantitatively heavy subject from a well-respected school, pretty much you can rely on headhunters and recruiters to come to you. And what I do is I just have my CV and my publications in a Google Drive. If they're offering a job that looks interesting enough, again, I haven't looked, I'm not currently looking, so I'm missing about 2 years of experience on this issue. But when that was happening, it was just, I popped them my Google Drive, they can look at it. And when I do show that to them, though, I do expect, for example, that when they reply to me, they've actually read that and they've actually read my CV. And if they haven't, then that is not a good sign that they're really looking for the ideal person. It looks like they're more just farming. Richard, are you looking at all?
I don't look for jobs, no.
Yeah, so there you go.
I guess I looked for my first job where I am now, but haven't had to since, and I won't have to again.
All right, so moving on next question. So in the workplace, what do people expect from a data scientist? I think you might have already tossed it to this question. So what should I expect from myself, going into this field?
Deliver value. Always expect yourself to deliver value. Think about what the other person needs don't feel smug about the fact that your title is data scientist. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you're delivering any value. Look to how to deliver value and ask people.
How about you, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I think Glenn hits it on the head, really. Expect to be useful. It's quite demoralizing to be in a job where you know you're not useful. You'll find out quite quickly if you feel that way or not. But I think certainly for yourself, yes, and to be valued and listened to is important too. What do people expect from a data scientist? I mean, speaking as a modeler, there's some people expect you to solve problems that can't be solved sometimes. And in those situations, it's about being transparent, I think. But and as Glenn said as well earlier, some people don't know what they expect from a data scientist, which is a whole different ball game and set of problems. But I think that's quite common.
All right, so moving on next question. So I think this has also already been answered, but just giving it one more time emphasis. I have been looking for internships to get in, like I have already said, and I have never stepped into any professional field. But most of the time when I apply for a job or apply for just for internships, the experience is a must. So what suggestions will you give for job seekers like me?
All right, cool. I'm ready to speed run this one, but you're gonna have to give me an extra minute or two than you want because this is a worthy answer. All right, cool. So I'd say the main thing is this. Keep in mind, if you don't have a job, you have one advantage, and that's that you have no opportunity cost to try to pursue something. You can basically pursue anything, and it's not like it's costing you money. It's not like it's costing you another opportunity. If no one's offering you a job, it means that you can basically take anything, and that's a leg up. And I think that the reason why it's important to think, as I said before, what value you can derive to people is, I actually drew a little graph for this, is what people don't realize is, consider this. If you're going for an internship, so say it's just an unpaid internship, saying I'm literally willing to work for free, and someone's still saying, well, you need some experience before I'll even let you work for free. And you're thinking, that's crazy. It actually isn't, because keep in mind this, you're using up their time. And so you do need to give them a positive return on their time. And I think what a lot of early career data scientists don't realize, and I'm going to pop this up for people, is that your value when you just start a project looks something like this. It's like a step function. And so I'll pop this up on the screen so it's bigger, where there's going to be a period of time where effectively you're not delivering any value, even though that person who's going to be mentoring you or managing you is putting in a lot of time. And if you want to say that I'm delivering no value and I'm costing them time, effectively, your value is negative up into the point where you start adding something. And so herein lies your opportunity, Ujjwal. So here's the good news. The people's, that step function that people have, different projects have that different inflection point where you add your first value. For doctoral students, for example, those projects are designed so that your value is somewhat farther out. You're going to be solving a bigger problem, but it takes more time to get up to speed. Master's degrees projects, that step up is shorter so that you still have time to do it. There are plenty of projects out there where, for example, even if you're just doing data wrangling to begin with, and then maybe they let you analyze some data on top of that, there are projects out there where your benefit to the person who's going to be managing you can be higher, and you should find those. More importantly, you have to convince them that you're going to get to that point where there's a return on their time. The easiest way to do that is really work your butt off. Like there's no, if this is your step function right here, then the key thing that you want to show is that that initial bit of time, I'm going to do that in like a week. And I don't care if that means I have to work an extra 10, 20 hours a week to get it done. You're going to get to that point so that they have a return on their time. So there is a bit of data scientist that does really reward working hard. And I would say you just have to be able to convince them that they are going to actually get a positive return on their time. If you're already working for free, that's a start, but you also have to show that they'll get their time back in some way. And so there's two things. One, work hard. And two, even if one person doesn't find you useful, the nice thing is there's a multitude of projects out there. It doesn't mean that you aren't useful. It means that you haven't found the person who has that project yet. And so, I mean, I know Richard did the same thing that I did, maybe not to the quite extent, but, during my doctorate, I did probably 4 or 5 sort of ancillary projects to my core piece of work. And that accounted for probably at least 6, maybe 8 months of my total doctoral time, which is a significant chunk, especially in the UK, given that doctors are a bit shorter there. And so those external projects, and I didn't get paid for any of those, they did help build me up. And so I would say you keep looking, look at departments, pester people, go to department heads, go to statistical consultancies. If no one else is offering you a job, you can find somebody and you can keep looking. You don't lose anything by stopping the search. So just keep searching. And there's plenty of departments you need somebody looking at data. As long as someone knows less about data analysis than you, there's someone who will actually think that you sound like a gem. And so keep that in mind. Richard, what did I miss?
Well, lots of things. I mean, I'm hoping I don't miss something when I respond as well. I think that here's a few things I would say. So the question is, looking for internships. Really, how do you get one? My particular approach was when I was doing my undergrad. I spent every summer doing something that was answering a question, would I like to do this? And I was able to do that. So I did some work in investment banking. I did some work in biochemistry research, computational biochemistry. And then by the time I, was outside of that, I was doing a doctorate and, other things happened. But what I would say is fundamentally, you have to be interested. I think that's what it comes back to, because as Glenn was saying, when things happen early on, someone has to take a risk. Whether you want to admit it, no matter how good you are, somebody is taking a risk to say, listen, even if it's for free, I'm investing something in somebody I don't know potentially nothing about. So I think you need to understand that what it is, where you bring value. And one of the things that people who are new to roles bring is enthusiasm. And I think that sometimes that's really powerful, especially when mixed with appropriate skills, hard skills. I think somebody who's really collaborative, listens well, and quite frankly is very persistent. That's good, but I think fundamentally, though, to be that, you have to be interested. And that's to say that might give you a chance, but that's not the answer. What else would I say? Glenn.
Oh, I was going to say just very quickly on that. Also, for as enthusiastic as you might be, keep in mind the first time you get feedback, the first few times you get feedback, if your supervisor is good, generally it's going to be very harsh and critical feedback. They're basically telling you what you need to get up to speed. So keep in mind that you might be putting in that extra, you might be putting 70 hours a week, and still get that, oh, well, this actually isn't what I was doing. And that was me for my first few months of my doctorate, where my supervisor just said, you know what, this isn't up to snuff. This is where you need you to be. And you know what? It was the best thing that they could have done for me. The worst thing they could have done is told me that I was adequate when I was underperforming. And so just keep in mind that you might be, kicking ass and working as hard as you can. In those first few times, they're going to basically tell you, yeah, that actually isn't good for anything. And don't be distraught about that. Those are the people who are helping you. The people who are going to be most critical of you are the ones who are helping you. So just basically have a bit of energy and reserve that you're going to get knocked down by your biggest champions, who are also going to be your biggest critics.
Yeah, that's true. I think those are the people who care about what you're delivering as well. If someone doesn't tell you those things, they're not interested. I think they've switched off. But yeah, I think the other thing about internships is depending on where you are in your, I guess, educational or professional career, I think it varies with what you want to be doing, because there are many people who might come and change careers, so they obviously bring a lot to the table professionally in those situations, but there might be other things to learn. But if you're early on, I think, as Glenn was saying, take opportunity to demonstrate and learn skills, because they often, I was fortunate because I did that simply because I kind of had to, really. And it turned into something I didn't expect. And I think a lot of the times, I remember when I was at university, I did a lot of coaching, as Glenn knows. I did a lot of coaching for Well, a few years. And to be quite honest, I think that's probably the best experience I had that's relevant for why I'm doing my job now and not something else, of which there are many other options. And I think that there are some things that may not be technical skills, but do come down to ultimately persistence and enthusiasm. Because I think that the lead time on some of the things you're going to need are years, not, oh, I can spend 2 months doing a course here or there.
All right, so I'm just I'll be out of time. So this is last question I always wanted to ask you. So where would you start? Let's say, you told that it depends upon in which educational background and what is your interest. So just kind of similar thing. I'm a master's student and it's my first semester actually in data science. I'm enrolled in a data science program in George Washington, DC. But as I said, I have never been explored to data science career before, and this is my first time I have ever been. And I have been working in projects like you said, like some of my data mining projects. Like I know those are very basics, but I do appreciate this because I am learning something. But then, so question would be, where would you start to develop your skills or education if you were in my position right now?
Yeah. I'll just do some quick math for you. So you're at GW, right?
Yeah, GW masters.
Yeah. Cool. So and you just started your master's, which means I guess you have do you have a year and a half or do you have a half year?
Year and a half.
A year and a half. Okay. So you have a year and a half. You're based in DC, right? How many universities are within about 30 minutes of DC? 30 to 45 minutes of DC?
Probably.
I can name quite a few that are in the Nova area. So let's just say Georgetown, GW, George Mason. Just the Georges. How close is Baltimore? Baltimore's not too far off from there, is it? You have some of the top research universities around you. How many science departments do those universities have between them? Dozens. You have a handful of universities. You have dozens of science departments. Do you see where this math is going? You can't tell me that no one in any of those departments, if you just went around, just said, here's a list of scientific endeavors that interest me. This is where I'm going to go. Oh, finance departments, business departments. It doesn't matter. Like you can see this. The opportunities that you can have in this next year and a half are insane. The main thing is like, how much time do you spend on Netflix or spend on like Nintendo Wii? If you take that time and literally just spend it working, one, you'll start enjoying it. Find some good coding music because that's what you really need. You need good coding music, and then you just need to get after it. I'd be extremely surprised if you took. And that's just universities. Like, I mean, there's also departments, there's NGOs, there's lobbying groups. They have tons of money. They might even pay you for your internship. But it is somewhere. The amount of work that is of people needing work done in your area is mind-boggling. You can't tell me that there aren't some people there who have something for a first-year master's student to work on, even if it is just shoveling data, organizing it, and at the end you maybe get to analyze it some. That's what I'd be doing. I'd basically be I would be hustling.
Yeah, I think to add to that, you got to go out and ask people questions, and say. And I think one of the things that might, I don't know what you think about this, Glenn, that might help is if you go to speak to somebody about something like this, some work, an opportunity basically to develop skills, have some ideas when you have that discussion. I'm interested in X and Y. I see that you do A, B, and C. Here's an idea. Is there a place for it? And I think when it comes to developing those skills in education, that follows from those opportunities. And I would also say that in and of itself is a skill. So yeah.
Yeah. My Richard's answer was of course implicit in mine. My idea is like you basically have all these departments. You look at what the faculty member is working on, and you just pester them and say, "You work in this. I'm interested in this. Can we make a deal? I'll be here for a year and a half. Leverage that. You'll be here for a year and a half. It's not like you're going to disappear in a few months and the time that they invested in you is not worthwhile. Furthermore, I assume that you have and we'll wrap it up after this, but I assume that you have a master's thesis to complete at the end of this, right?
Yeah, I guess there is a capstone project at the last of them.
Yeah. So given that that's a requirement in your research already, effectively they can have someone who's going to be guaranteed to be around for a year and a half. Will need to work on a capstone project anyway. This is your opportunity. People need work done, and that is what you have to offer. You have your time, you have your skill set. Your skill set will keep growing. Your time is finite, but spend it wisely. And yeah, just go start knocking on doors, sending emails, explaining yourself, and somebody is bound to say, Ujjwal seems like a good deal to me. And even if it's not a professor, talk to a postdoc who's ambitious. Even if it's not a postdoc, talk to a doctoral student who's ambitious. Say no doctoral students want you. Talk to a master's degree student or like a really precocious go-getting undergrad who's starting up a business. Like literally just pester the crap out of people. Someone needs you to shovel some data and do something. And that's how you get started, and you will get better at it. And the moment you've done it the first time, well, then you have something to your belt. And frankly, your time might be worthwhile more than the people who might have turned you down the first time.
Yeah, there's two things I would add to that, and I guess I'll stop at that point. One is be interested in it, because I think that, and there's many things to be interested in any given problem, so that's kind of a moot point. But ultimately, be interested, and then the other thing I'd add is it's amazing how many what seemed to be trivial tasks at the time became something profound for me. Like I tell you one funny story. So I worked with MATLAB when I was a doctoral student, like many engineers do, right? And then I ended up running out of the license for MATLAB for various reasons. I didn't have MATLAB anymore, and all my code was written in MATLAB. But it's like, look, there's R programming, and that's free, and I've got no money, so I can't pay for any licenses. So I ended up say, if I want to continue doing this, I've got to just learn R, right? And it was a bit painful and trivial sometimes and tedious, but, you sit down and you do these things, and there are other circumstances where that's the case in whatever work you're doing during your program that might seem like, that's not really that so interesting, but it turns into something quite powerful. You could probably cut my last answer there because it was a bit of a random.
No, that stays in the final part. All right, cool. So Ujjwal, I hope that answered your questions. For those interested, if you have other career type questions, Richard and I were around here for the next, 60 or so years. Richard is a British statistician. He might have another like 70 or 80 on me. But there we go. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey folks, it's Glenn. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pod of Asclepius. If so, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and hitting that subscribe and bell button. For a small channel and every bit helps. If you have a department, a lab, or even just friends who would like this episode, definitely forward it along. I don't have any of those things, but if you do, you should definitely celebrate by sending them an episode. We've got plenty of episodes on healthcare topics, particularly in data science and machine learning, so check out the other episodes on the channel, or some of the playlists. You can also check out our website to join our mailing list or see our sponsors. Thanks so much to our sponsors for their support. And while the views discussed on the show are undoubtedly scintillating, they don't necessarily represent the views of our sponsors, the speaker's employer, my views, your views, my neighbor's cat's views, your cat's views, or anyone else not saying the words. In fact, they might not even represent the speaker's views by the time you're hearing it, so be sure to subscribe in case they come back onto the show to change their mind. See what I did there? Thanks again.